Welcome back everyone. Now let me start this tutorial by showing you a couple of examples. In the previous tutorials we discussed about conditional statements or if statements, right? And this is the kind of syntax we used while writing if statements till now. So we write if and then we specify a condition which is nothing but a boolean expression that evaluates to true or false. And inside if block we write the code we want to execute if this condition is true, and in the else block we write the code we want to execute if the condition is false. So this is the kind of syntax we have used till now. Now in Python very often we will come across a different way of writing if statements, which is using this kind of syntax. If you look at both these if statements closely, we will see that here we are not using a boolean expression. In fact, this name is a string with a value Sachin. And similarly, if you see here, this items is an integer. It's not a boolean expression or boolean value. So the first impression we get when we see this kind of syntax is something is wrong. But if you execute this program, let me execute, right click, run, you will see that it works perfectly fine. Don't worry about what kind of output we are getting for now, but the important point to note here is this works perfectly fine. This kind of syntax works perfectly fine in Python because of a concept called truthy values and falsy values. Let's try to understand what these values are. First, let's start by understanding what is Boolean context. Boolean context is nothing but places where Boolean expressions or Boolean values are expected. Let's see these examples so that you will clearly understand what we mean by this. Now if you see this example, here we have an expression A and B and C. These are logical operators, right? So we use these logical operators between Boolean values or Boolean expressions. So as soon as we see this kind of an expression, we expect these A, B, C to be either Boolean values or Boolean expressions. Boolean expressions mean the expressions that evaluate to Boolean values true or false, right? So as soon as we see this expression, we expect these values A, B, C to be Boolean expressions or Boolean values. Similarly, if we see any if statement, we specify the condition using a Boolean expression. So we expect this expression 1 to be either a Boolean expression or a Boolean value, right? Similarly, if you see this example, here we have this Boolean condition which has multiple expressions connected with OR. So here also we expect this expression 1 and expression 2 to be Boolean values or Boolean expressions, right? And if you see the last example, this is the syntax we use when we write while loops, which we will discuss in future. But just like if statements, even while writing while statements, we will use a Boolean condition, which means a Boolean expression which evaluates to true or false. Now here we have two expressions, expression 3 and expression 4, connected with logical and as soon as we see this, we expect this expression 3 and expression 4 to be Boolean values or Boolean expressions. So all these places come under Boolean context because as soon as we see them, we expect Boolean expressions or Boolean values in these places. Now one interesting thing about Python is even non-Boolean values or expressions can also be used in Boolean contexts. Now if we see these two examples, these are the same examples we have seen in the beginning. If we observe this if statement, here we are writing it as if name. Now this name is not a Boolean expression. In fact, it is a string with value Sachin. So we are basically using a string value in a Boolean context. Similarly, if you see here, this quantity is an integer with value 0. So we are using an integer in a Boolean context. And both these work perfectly fine in Python because Python allows using non-Boolean values or expressions in Boolean contexts. Now the question that arises is, how should Python treat these values? Should it consider them as true or should it consider them as false? Because if you see here, if this is considered as true, this block of code will be executed. If it is considered as false, then the code inside else block will be executed. So somehow Python has to figure out how it should consider these values, right? And that's where the concept of truthy falsy values comes into picture. So in Python, any value when used in Boolean context is either called a truthy value or a falsy value. Truthy value means the value is considered true when used in Boolean context. Falsy value means the value is considered as false when used in Boolean context. Now let's try to understand what values come under truthy values and what values come under falsy values. First, let's see what values come under falsy, because falsy values are limited in number and it's very easy to memorize them. And any value which is not falsy, it comes under truthy value. Now, what do we mean by falsy values? Values that behave as false in Boolean contexts. And what all values come under falsy values? Obviously, the Boolean value false is a falsy value, and apart from it, none value is also a falsy value, and numeric zeros are also falsy values. When we say numerical zeros, we mean integer 0 or floating point number 0.0 or complex number 0. We don't use complex numbers much, so remember that both integer 0 or floating point 0, which is 0.0, they are also falsy values. And apart from these, empty sequences and collections, they also come under falsy values. We will be discussing about all these sequences and collections in future videos, but for now remember that all the empty sequences and collections, they are considered as falsy values, like empty string, empty list, empty tuple, empty set, empty dictionary, and empty range. All these are also considered as falsy values. So what all values are falsy values? The Boolean value false, none value, and numeric 0, and empty sequences and collections. All these come under falsy values. Now let's see the truthy values. Now what are truthy values? Values that behave as true in Boolean contexts. All other values which are not falsy are truthy values. For example, Boolean value true. Boolean value false comes under falsy values, right? But Boolean value true comes under truthy values. This is kind of obvious. Now this integer 10. The numeric zeros come under falsy values and every other number comes under truthy values. So this integer 10 is a truthy value, and here we have a string hello. Empty string comes under falsy value, but here this is a non-empty string, right? So this comes under truthy value. Now if you see here we have a string with spaces. This is not an empty string. Only empty string is falsy and every other string comes under truthy. So even this string with spaces is considered as truthy value. And empty sequences and collections come under falsy values. So everything else, which means non-empty sequences and collections, they all come under truthy values. So all non-empty sequences and collections also come under truthy values. So the easiest way is to remember the falsy values because these are limited and everything else comes under truthy values. Now in Python, we can use this bool function to find truthiness of any value or object. And why do we say value or object here? Because we know that in Python, any value is stored in the form of an object. For example, this integer value is actually stored in the form of an integer object. String value is actually stored in the form of a string object. That's why I mentioned value or object here, alright? Now let's see these examples to understand how this bool function works. So bool of any falsy value will return false and bool of any truthy value will return true. If you see here, false is obviously a falsy value. So bool of false will return false. So it will print false. Now if you see here, we have bool of 25. We know that only numeric zeros are falsy values and every other number is a truthy value. So bool of 25 will return true. Similarly here, bool of Sachin, this is a string. Only empty string comes under falsy value and every other string comes under truthy value. So bool of Sachin will return true. There should be a closing parenthesis here. So bool of Sachin will return true. In the next example, we have bool of 0. We know that numeric 0 is falsy value. So bool of any falsy value will return false. So it will print false. Now here we have bool of an empty list. We know empty sequences and collections are falsy values. So bool of empty list will return false. Now in this last example, here we have bool of a list with elements 1, 2, 3. This is a non-empty list, right? So this is considered a truthy value. So bool of this list will give you true. Now let's put these examples in the code and verify the outputs. By the way, I'm writing all this code in a Python file named truthy_falsy_values.py. Now let me run this program. Right click, run. So this is the output, and you can see we got the same outputs as we discussed. All right. Now let me add a couple of more examples. So here we have bool of an empty string. We know that empty string is falsy value. So bool of this empty string should return false. And here we have a string, but this is not an empty string. There is a space. Only empty string is considered as falsy, but the string with space is not an empty string, right? So it is considered as truthy value. So this should return true. So let me run this program again. So this is the output. So if you see the output of these last two statements, so bool of empty string returns false, but bool of the string with spaces, it returns true. Now I hope you clearly understood what values are truthy and what values are falsy. Now let's go back to our initial examples. Here we have if name. Now while writing if statements, Python expects to have a Boolean expression here. So this is a Boolean context. But here this name is a string with value Sachin. Now this is a non-empty string, so it is a truthy value. Truthy value means this behaves as true. That's why it will execute the statements inside the if block. So it should print welcome, and we are concatenating with this string Sachin, so it should print welcome Sachin. Similarly, if you see this example, here we have if quantity. Now again, this is a Boolean context, but here we have an integer with value 0. Now numeric 0 is considered as a falsy value, so this will behave as false. So that's why it will execute the statements inside the else block. So it will print item unavailable. Now let's run the program and verify if we get the same outputs. So if we go to these two examples, here let me put item unavailable instead of no stock. Let me keep the outputs consistent. All right. Okay, now let's run this program. Right click, run. And if you go to the initial outputs, right? So these two are the initial outputs, right? So if you see here, it prints welcome Sachin, right? The first if statement, and then it goes to the next if statement, and here it prints item unavailable, right? So we got the same outputs as we discussed. Now we understood how to analyze the output of the program when we use these truthy and falsy values. But what is the advantage of using this concept? Let's try to discuss that. All right, now let's look at this very common scenario. Here I have a variable name to which I have assigned a string with value Sachin. Here I have directly assigned the value, but assume that this value might be coming from some external source like a database or external user input. Now, as per the problem statement, it is given that name can only be none, empty string, or a valid non-empty string. So these are the three possible values that we might get from the database or any external user input. And the name is considered invalid if the value is either none or empty string, and it is considered valid if it is non-empty string. Now here you might be wondering, what if we have a string with only spaces? Generally speaking, we don't treat this as a valid name, but for this example, let's assume this is also a valid name. Or for the sake of simplicity, we can even assume that We don't have such data where the name is made up of only empty spaces. All right. Now what we want to do is, if the name is valid, we want to print welcome and whatever name we get. If it is not valid, we want to simply print welcome guest because we don't have a valid name. Now how can we check if the name is valid? So the name can only be none, empty string, or a valid non-empty string. So if name is not equal to none and if it is not equal to empty string, obviously we can confirm that it is a valid non-empty string because these are the only three possibilities we have as per the problem statement. So we write the condition in this way: if name is not equal to none and name is not equal to empty string, then we can say that it is a valid name, and so we'll simply print welcome and we are concatenating it with the name. In this case, as name value is Sachin, so this will print welcome Sachin. Let's try to execute it. Right click, run. We can see that this is the output. We got welcome Sachin. Now if the value of name is either none or empty string, one of these two conditions will be false. So for this condition to be true, both of them should be true as we have and, right? In case if this name is empty string, then what will happen? So name not equal to none, this is true, name is not equal to none. And then it goes here, name not equal to empty string. This is false, right? Name is actually equal to empty string. So this will fail. So this whole condition will fail because we have and in between. And so it will print welcome guest. Let's run this, right click, run, and we can see that it prints welcome guest. The same is the case if we have the value as none, right? So it goes here, name not equal to none, this will fail because name is actually equal to none, right? So this will fail, and so this whole expression value will be false. So it will again print welcome guest. So let's run this again. So it prints welcome guest. So if the name is valid, like this non-empty string Sachin, it will print welcome Sachin. And if it is not valid, which means if it is none or empty string, it will print welcome guest. Now we can write the same logic in a much easier and elegant way by using truthy falsy values concept. Like in this way. So here, instead of writing this complicated condition, name not equal to none and name not equal to empty string, we can simply write the condition as if name. And why does this work the same way? It is because only if this name is a non-empty string, then this name will be a truthy value, right? So then this will be considered as true and it will print welcome Sachin in this case. But if it is invalid, for example, if it is none or empty string, then none and empty string are falsy values. So this will be considered as false, and so it will execute the else block. So if the name is valid, it will execute this statement and it will print welcome and whatever name we have, like welcome Sachin in this case. And if it is not valid, it will print welcome guest. This is exactly what the above code is also doing. But here in this case, we are doing the same thing in a much more easier and elegant manner. Here Pythonic way means the elegant coding style we follow by using different features provided by Python. Alright. Now in both these cases, I'm giving this valid name Sachin. Let's see if we get the same output. Right click, run. So as you can see, in traditional way, we got welcome Sachin, and even in Pythonic way, we got welcome Sachin. Now let's give an invalid name like an empty string in both the cases. Now let's see what happens. Right click, run. So it prints welcome guest in both the situations. Same is the case with none. If we use none and if we also put none here, now in both these cases, the name is not valid. So it should print welcome guest, right? So let's verify that as well. Right click, run. So it prints welcome guest in both the cases. So I hope you understood how truthy falsy values concept helps us write our code in a much easier and elegant way. That's all for this tutorial, and let's continue with some more examples and concepts related to truthy falsy values in the next tutorial. I'll see you there.